Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, a monologue. I want to start tonight by sharing with you an abstract that a teenage Benjamin Franklin wrote under the fictitious name of Silence Dogood. If you've never had a chance, go read the Silence Dogood letters. There's a lot of very good stuff in there when you realize that Ben Franklin was only a teenager when he wrote those letters. It's truly astounding. But then teenage Benjamin Franklin in 1722, more than a half century before our nation's Declaration of Independence, he wrote this letter to the New England Current, and in it he included this abstract from the London Journal, and I quote, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty. Without freedom of speech, which is the right of every man, as far as by it he does not hurt or control the right of another, and this is the only check it ought to suffer, and the only bounds it ought to know. This sacred privilege is so essential to free governments that the security of property and the freedom of speech always go together. And in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech, a thing terrible to public traitors." With that abstract in mind, I'll tell you, from where I sit today, I am very, very thankful indeed for the providence that has brought our nation through so much and so quickly. When viewed through the history of nations, raised this nation, America, to such tremendous prosperity that the American people would ever be sovereign, free from control of a king on some distant shore, was certainly not probable when Ben Franklin penned that letter in 1722. Even then, though our resounding Declaration and miraculous Constitution had not yet been written, the souls of Americans cried out for a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But tyrants, then and now, feel compelled to exert control. Some feel entitled, and some claim a mandate, whether from God or from man, from something. If the American experiment has taught us anything, it has indeed affirmed what our founders knew to be true. Woe to the people who willingly transfer their individual agency, their liberty, to any governmental body. At its best, government is at its smallest. It is only exactly as big as absolutely necessary to deter or defeat any internal or external force that would seek to put its interests before the people. Government must be less powerful than the individual agency of each American. Government, made up of imperfect, corruptible, tending to be power-hungry people, will only grow unless the people constantly seek to restrain it. That absolute has been affirmed most clearly by this, our American experiment. Our founders, very well educated in philosophy and the history of governments, went to great lengths in our Constitution to give us a framework that limited government. They stacked the deck in favor of the people foremost, with power secondly in the states, as long as the states operated within the U.S. Constitution's constraints. The federal government was always to be restrained with enumerated, very specific powers, essentially only those powers necessary to hold the Confederation of States together in a union that could withstand external threats. Again, the purpose of government was always to protect the agency of the individual. But since our independence, our constitutional framework, as brilliant as it was, and the American DNA have helped check the tendencies of government. But our government has done what governments and bureaucracies do by their very nature. It has grown steadily over time. Good governors and inspired citizenry have had successes in rolling back government, but it has always been one step forward and two steps back. At best, in the size and the influence of a government.